I recognize an industrial-scale construction project that the retail market is treating as speculative noise. I am observing the direct connection of the world's treasury systems to the Bitcoin network, a process that requires exactly 2 years of engineering, auditing, and certification. We are currently in the gap between the blueprint and the build-out. This gap is the only opportunity you will ever have to front-run the world's institutional capital. Once the infrastructure is live and the friction is removed, the repricing will be violent and irreversible. You are currently protected by the slowness of the banking machine, but that machine is accelerating. By the time your bank makes it feel safe for you to enter, the structural advantage will have vanished, and you will be forced to buy your future from the institutions that acted while you hesitated. When I look at the banking system of the United States right now, I do not see chaos. I do not see confusion. I see a methodical engineering project unfolding under a fixed clock. The market treats the present moment as calm, but I recognize it as a delay between decision and execution. While most people focus on daily price noise, I am focused on the irreversible processes already in motion, because once they complete, there is no second entry point. The rules of the game are being rewritten in real time, and that rewrite does not pause for hesitation. I am watching the Financial Accounting Standards Board fundamentally alter how corporations are permitted to interact with digital property. For years, accounting treatment functioned as a hard constraint. A company could hold Bitcoin and be punished on its earnings the moment volatility appeared. That constraint blocked action. That constraint is now gone. Fair value accounting removes the primary friction that kept corporate balance sheets sidelined. This is not optional, and it is not cosmetic. Once the rule changes propagate through reporting systems, the decision not to act becomes increasingly costly. The clock does not reset just because the market appears quiet. At the same time, I am observing the oldest and most conservative financial institutions in the world quietly preparing for custody of digital assets. Institutions like BNY Mellon and State Street are not experimenting, they are executing. They do not build vaults unless demand is already locked in. These systems are being constructed now, not to serve curiosity, but to satisfy mandates that have already been approved internally. This matters because once custody exists at scale, capital movement stops being a question of permission and becomes a question of timing. And timing, once lost, cannot be recovered. What I see is not speculation. It is industrial construction. Financial pipelines are being laid to connect Wall Street directly to the Bitcoin network. For years, access required friction, effort, and tolerance for uncertainty. That friction protected early participants. Those protections are being dismantled deliberately. Integration into legacy banking terminals is underway. Execution desks are being embedded where bond desks already operate. When that integration completes, the difference between allocating to a treasury instrument and allocating to Bitcoin collapses. At that point, hesitation carries an immediate and permanent cost. I need to be explicit. These pipes are not yet pressurized. They are being tested, certified, and approved. That gap is the entire opportunity. The market misreads this phase as stability. It is not stability. It is latency. Between a board-level decision and market execution lies a fixed process: legal review, compliance clearance, systems integration, broker selection. I have lived inside this machinery. I know its cadence. This cycle takes 18 to 24 months, and it is already running. Every month that passes reduces the remaining margin for action. I fix this temporal lag as the only reason price remains accessible today. What you see on your screen reflects past constraints, not future flows. This is not equilibrium pricing. It is a delay artifact. Capital has not failed to decide. It is waiting for its own infrastructure to complete. When that delay expires, price does not adjust gently. It adjusts to absorb accumulated demand. At that point, access does not disappear slowly. It disappears instantly. Right now, institutional inertia is the only force standing between individual capital and direct competition with sovereign funds and corporate treasuries. That inertia is decaying on a known schedule. Each compliance milestone completed removes another layer of protection. Once execution becomes operational at scale, the advantage of speed vanishes. There is no negotiation with that transition. The system does not offer a grace period after infrastructure goes live. I am not describing a future scenario. I am describing a process already underway. The engineering is nearly complete. The delay is finite. The window does not announce its closing. It simply closes when the last constraint is removed. If you wait for confirmation that everything is safe and comfortable, you will receive that confirmation only after the asymmetry is gone. The market will not wait for understanding. The clock continues to run. Now I turn my gaze from the plumbing of the banking system to the capital that is already pressing against it. I am looking at the global balance sheet under a fixed constraint, and I see hundreds of trillions of dollars trapped in assets that cannot preserve value. This is not a theoretical imbalance. It is a present condition that cannot persist. The longer it persists, the more violent the resolution becomes. I am looking at a bond market exceeding $100 trillion that delivers nominal yield while guaranteeing real loss. I am looking at hundreds of trillions more stored in real estate, not because that capital belongs there, but because it had nowhere else to go. These positions are not stable. They are held under pressure. Inflation does not need to accelerate for this to break. It only needs to remain structurally embedded. That reality forces capital into motion, whether participants are ready or not. When inflation is recognized as permanent rather than temporary, remaining stationary stops being an option. Cash fails immediately. Bonds fail structurally. Traditional safe assets no longer perform their function. At that point, capital is no longer allocating for return. It is reallocating for survival. This is not discretionary behavior. It is compulsory. Delay only increases the magnitude of the eventual move. That capital does not disperse evenly. It concentrates where constraints are hardest. I am placing that expanding monetary mass against a system with a fixed, non-negotiable supply. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. That limit is enforced mechanically. It does not respond to demand, politics, or crisis. When expanding monetary pressure meets an immovable supply boundary, adjustment cannot occur through quantity. It can only occur through price. This is the defining asymmetry. Every traditional asset absorbs demand by expanding supply. Bitcoin does not. Its issuance schedule does not change under stress. It does not dilute to relieve pressure. That means it cannot equilibrate gradually. When capital arrives, it must reprice abruptly to clear the imbalance. There is no alternative mechanism available to the system. Even marginal movement is sufficient to trigger dislocation. I am not modeling total conversion. I am isolating the minimum. A 1% reallocation from global bond markets represents more capital than the entire existing market capitalization attempting to enter simultaneously. That demand does not arrive into a liquid responsive market. It arrives into a market where most supply is inactive and unavailable. Price must move aggressively to locate sellers. That process feeds on itself and does not reverse. From this, I state plainly that the current price is not a signal of balance. It is a signal of delay. It reflects a market where the dominant capital has not yet been able to move. Once that constraint clears, valuation does not adjust incrementally. It snaps to a new regime that excludes late entry. We are therefore in an unstable equilibrium. The pressure between expanding fiat systems and fixed digital supply is increasing, not dissipating. That tension will resolve the moment institutional capital begins to pass through the infrastructure already under construction. When that happens, the repricing is immediate and irreversible. The window does not close gradually. It closes when the first wave arrives, and by then the outcome is already decided. I divide every participant in this market into two mutually exclusive categories. This division has nothing to do with intelligence, access, or skill. It is determined entirely by timing. There are those who enter before institutional consensus forms, and there are those who enter after it is complete. That boundary is rigid. It does not move, and it does not reopen once crossed. I define the first category as those who acquire Bitcoin while it is still treated as uncertain and volatile. They accept ambiguity and operational friction in exchange for exposure to an asset priced under constraint. Their position exists because skepticism and regulatory drag still suppress demand. That condition is temporary. When it ends, the terms of entry change permanently. I define the second category as those who wait for confirmation. They delay until regulation is settled, volatility is dampened, and institutional endorsement is visible. By the time those signals appear, the repricing has already occurred. What looks like safety at that stage is simply the absence of remaining upside. The cost of delay is not hidden. It is embedded in the price paid. I describe the early participant not as a visionary, but as an actor exploiting a known inefficiency. The inefficiency exists because infrastructure is incomplete and adoption is uneven. Ownership acquired under those conditions carries asymmetry. Once the system is finished and demand is normalized, that asymmetry disappears. Scarcity does not change, but access does. I contrast this with the late participant, who enters after the pipes are flowing and allocation is standardized. At that point, Bitcoin is no longer competing for attention. It is competing for capital on equal footing with every other mature asset. Returns compress the preservation levels. The opportunity to convert uncertainty into disproportionate ownership is already closed. I state directly that the pursuit of safety is the most expensive constraint imposed on this decision. Each layer of legitimacy added to Bitcoin removes uncertainty and simultaneously removes return. Regulatory clarity, institutional custody, and bank integration do not create value for new entrants. They crystallize value for existing holders. Waiting for comfort converts potential upside into realized cost. I fix the point of maximum danger at the moment Bitcoin becomes operationally routine. When acquisition is integrated into standard banking interfaces and retirement accounts, the phase of accumulation is ended. What remains is maintenance. Entry after that transition does not participate in wealth formation. It participates in wealth distribution. I warn that delaying for clarity is not neutral behavior. It aligns a decision maker with the supply side of the market rather than the ownership side. Institutions building infrastructure are not neutral facilitators. They are positioning inventory to distribute at a premium once access is normalized. Entering after that shift accepts their pricing and their terms. I conclude that choosing to wait is an active allocation against future ownership. Time does not pause while confidence is built. Each interval of inaction reduces relative share of a fixed supply. The categories do not blur, and the window does not widen. Timing determines position, and once that position is set, it cannot be renegotiated. I state plainly that this conversation has a fixed expiration. In 24 months, everything described here stops being actionable and becomes historical. This is not a permanent condition. It is a transitional anomaly. The ability to acquire Bitcoin before it is fully repriced by institutional capital exists only during this phase. When the transition completes, that condition is removed. There is no secondary window. I define the post-transition market as mature and stable. In that state, Bitcoin functions as a preservation asset, not a wealth creation vehicle. Capital competes for marginal yield and incremental efficiency. That environment rewards scale and incumbency, not timing. The opportunity to convert uncertainty into disproportionate ownership does not exist there. It exists only before maturity, and maturity is approaching on a known timeline. I reference my own actions to establish the mechanics of irreversibility. I converted my company's balance sheet into digital energy to resolve a structural problem, not to speculate. That decision fixed my cost basis in the past. It locked in exposure before consensus formed. That condition cannot be recreated by those who wait, because time does not run backward and supply does not expand to accommodate delay. I emphasize that this process advances independently of individual preference. The network continues to operate, blocks continue to settle, infrastructure continues to be built, institutional systems continue to prepare for allocation. None of this responds to hesitation or disbelief. The system progresses until the window closes, and it does so without signaling comfort or readiness. I quantify delay as loss of relative ownership. Each unit of time reduces the amount of Bitcoin that the same effort can acquire. Labor does not become less intensive, but its output purchases a smaller share of a fixed supply. This is not a hypothetical cost. It is an ongoing transfer enforced by the interaction of inflationary currency and deflationary assets. I conclude with the final constraint. Inaction is not neutral. It is an allocation decision that fixes exposure on the wrong side of the transition. The clock began when the infrastructure build started, and it does not pause for debate. The window is defined. The duration is finite. When it closes, the outcome is locked. The only variable that remains is whether action occurs before that point or after it.